Welcome to part 2 of this video series. In this video, I'm going over blocking. So before I jump into blocking, just what you're looking at here is kind of a continuation of planning where I haven't used this rig before, so I'm kind of taking a minute or two to just kind of explore how his controls are set up, how they're oriented, and changing those orientations to what is going to be most helpful for me doing this particular scene. So that's sort of what I'm doing as I'm clicking through the controls here. But in terms of blocking, I'm going to be going over how I define blocking, what I'm looking to accomplish through the process, and then what I'm thinking about as I'm working and as I'm blocking out this shot. So the way I define blocking is creating the poses necessary to communicate my ideas for the shot clearly to others. And basically that's just making sure that there is enough information in the poses and that they're clear enough that I don't have to be in the room narrating everything to whoever I'm trying to show it to get their feedback or input. I can send them a file, they can look at it, and they can give me feedback, and I don't have to feel like, oh yeah, well I was going to add that and I was going to do this. All of that should be communicated in the blocking, and so that getting to that level changes based on each shot. So for this shot and this video is gonna be kind of my first pass at that, and so as I've been working, the way that I have come to think about blocking is sort of in two phases. The first phase of blocking for me is story, where I'm just doing kind of the key poses that are necessary for communicating the story of the shot. So in the last video when we were planning, all of those poses I want to make sure that I get set up with this character, and I'm gonna try to establish the timing of the shot in this pass and make sure that those are working. So I want solid poses that are really clear, evocative, telling the story, and I want the timing of when those poses are happening to be set up. So that's sort of my first major goal in blocking, and that's what I'm going to be doing in this video. And then sort of phase 2 blocking is establishing really good breakdowns and defining my secondary actions, really nailing down timing so that when I'm in spline, I'm just smoothing out arcs and making more subtle changes. I'm always open to bigger changes if they need to happen. Sometimes things are looking great in blocking and then you switch it over and it's just not working. So you need to stay open to being able to change those things if they need to be, but trying to get as close to final as I can. And so for me, as I'm kind of moving from blocking to spline, I tend to work with the graph editor splined, but I use the key scroll keys, so the less than, greater than arrows in the default shortcut keys is sort of like traditional animators will kind of thumb through or flip through their keys. I will have the graph editor open and the graphs will be splined usually, but I'm just sort of clicking through my key poses, and by having it splined I can sort of get a cheap breakdown sometimes, or at least a starting point for a breakdown pose that I'll kind of pick a frame that I want to favor, set a key on everything, and then make the adjustments on the controllers that I want to, so that I have better overlapping actions and drags and things like that. So over this video and the next video, that's where I'm gonna be going. And now I think I'm gonna kind of just keep talking about what we're seeing on the screen. I'm trying this a little bit different because as I watched my planning video, I felt like I had a lot of blank space and not necessarily a super cohesive explanation of what was happening. So I tried just doing a screen capture of me working on blocking, and now I'm kind of voicing over. Another goal of that was that I'm kind of wanting these videos to be as close to real time as I can get them without being insanely long at the same time. So this was a compromise I was going to try out to see if I could do that efficiently. So off screen I have the PDF file that I downloaded from the planning video from Sync Sketch, and that I usually just have open on the screen next to me, and I can look at my drawings and they have a timestamp on those, so I know which frame I should be posing my Maya character on to get a nice solid rough timing. So it also helps me kind of speed up just working, because I'm able to, I know the pose that I'm trying to create, so I'm not usually doing a lot of kind of figuring out like, oh, well, I wonder if this would work. I try to get the video reference pretty close so that I can just copy those sketches and that timing in the 3D space. So I'm trying to move quickly, keep sort of a looseness about the poses, and also having a solid plan kind of helps with that. In this pass, I'm focusing on the mechanics of the shot and the timing of those. I think I might add a blink or two a little bit later, but overall the basic expression is that he's really excited, and he's that way throughout. So trying to quickly nail down the mechanics and see how I can push those. One of the big takeaways that you want to establish in blocking is that idea of solid poses. And I talk about golden poses, key poses, story poses. Those are the poses that are essential to the story and communicating what's happening. And while I'm trying to work quickly through this, that is always in my mind, trying to keep track of that. And that's why I tend to work with this setup where I have the graph editor down below, perspective window, and then the shot cam. So I can check the pose from every angle in the perspective window, but ultimately kind of keeping an eye on that shot cam window to make sure, especially with silhouettes, that things are reading clearly. That idea of a solid pose, having a very clear silhouette, and I'm trying not to cheat anything at this point. I want it to look correct from any perspective, because at this point, if I'm already kind of cheating some things, unless I'm planning to key every frame for that section, it's potential for causing just more work for me later in splining. Whereas if I'm working in the space correctly here, when I click into spline and start working with that, I have those in-betweens working for me a little bit better. I'm still going to be breaking them down further so that they're doing what I want them to do, but the functionality is going to be there to help with that. So right now I've got his starting pose turning into his run pose, because those are the first two major beats. I'm spending quite a bit of time making sure that those two sections are looking good. I'm wanting the spine to have some contrasting actions, contrasting curves, so that there's a little bit of interest later. So like right now, I'm keeping his spine forward and kind of like the first section where he's clapping, I tried to really push that leaning forward, because I'm gonna be doing this big action of his right arm coming up, and he's gonna do a big jump and wave to the camera. And so I know that I'm wanting to end with a curve towards screen right, so I'm trying to favor screen left a little bit more, so that there's that contrast in there. My blocking workflow for this shot is closest to a pose-to-pose model, where, because I've already established poses using Sync Sketch and my video reference, I know the poses that I'm wanting to get my character into. I know about when I'm wanting them to happen, and so it's lending itself really well to that style of pose-to-pose. I'd also say that I probably have a few elements of a layered approach, where right now in this stage I'm really focused on the rotations and translations of the cog, and just like the root control of the character, the spine, and how that's moving through space. The other elements I'm a little bit looser with, and just as I continue to add breakdowns in my blocking, I refine the arms and legs that much more. But at this early stage, the spine and that root control of the character are my major focus, and so in that way it's a little bit layered as well. But because I've established my poses and what I want, I'm able to get very close with the arms and legs as well in this pass. And it just helps speed up the process as I keep moving through it. Yeah, in the next video, as I think I'm going to be doing sort of a blend of blocking spline in the next video, just because as I was working, I was realizing that that's how I am working. It's kind of funny, I didn't really think about it until I started recording myself and trying to talk about it, that I realized how much I blended those two stages. And so the next video will probably be a blend of those, and you'll kind of see how, I mean, you can even see now in the graph editor, I'm not working in stepped, but I learned on a computer that didn't have a ton of processing power, so I didn't have the ability to be viewing playback at all, and so I just got in a habit of flipping through my keys, and so I pretty much just keep the graph editor in spline, but because of how I navigate through the scene, I'm only looking at my keys, and so I'm seeing it as stepped as I'm working. And then you'll see towards the end of this video, I will, when I make a play blast, I will select all the controllers, select all of the curves, and switch into stepped mode at that point, so that I'll see a play blast in stepped and watch it that way. But as I'm working, I tend to keep the curves splined, especially in the kind of next stage of, or next phase of the blocking, where I'm really wanting my breakdowns to be established and all the little secondary actions and things. Having it in spline does help me get to, it kind of gets me some starting poses a lot of the time, and then I'm just tweaking the timing of a few of the controls, or to get those drags and overlaps into everything that I'm wanting it to get to. But having it in spline kind of helps create some nice starting points, and also lets me see a little bit more of how Maya is translating everything in the amount of frames that I'm giving it. And so again, that kind of helps with refining the timing. If I'm in spline and I do start going through every frame, I can see can start to see that, oh, this has too many frames, it's taking too long to get to where it needs to be, and that can either get fixed by me just adjusting and making another breakdown, or selecting everything and taking out some frames so that the entire action is happening faster. All of those things, by having it in spline, while I'm working, I can still sort of see that. So in that sense, they're sort of blended between the two. So right here, I knew that I had a pose on an earlier frame. He was going to have one step with his other foot, and then he was going to be landing on that same foot again. And so after I had my first pose blocked out, and because I had done the planning, I knew about which frame that was going to be happening on, so I copied the pose forward and then placed the character about where I thought he was going to be in 3D space, so that then I can go halfway through to add the step for the other leg, which sort of just inverts the original pose. But that was just a way of trying to use what I've already done to sort of speed up the blocking process. In this pass, you can see that I am creating a key for each footstep. I'm not just saying like, okay, so now he's running and slide him across the screen, sort of like you might with like a layout pass or something, where if I were to have done that, I'm just using the character as more like a placeholder so that I can establish the camera and everything, which I think of as different than blocking, where blocking should be closer to, rather than a layout pass where you're using it as a placeholder, it needs to be closer to what you are going to be animating, so that your director or your supervisor can see, they can see that you're going to be doing 4 steps instead of 6, or vice versa. They can see which foot is landing where, and in that way you can even problem solve sometimes, because if the setting is bigger than you had set out in your planning, or shorter, but you need certain, like I really want that front leg to have a major shape change when he hits this wall, and if I'm just using him like a placeholder and I have his run pose and I slide him across the screen and say, well, this is the timing, this is my blocking for timing, you can't see which leg is actually hitting and where it's hitting. And so if the stage is bigger or smaller than you're planning, you might need to add or remove an extra step so that the same final pose can be created. So in that sense, making sure that each footfall is in place and blocked out is something I think is important. And again, this, because of the nature of this shot, and the shot is an action physicality shot, whereas if it's a mostly dialogue shot and you don't see their legs, maybe you could get by without doing that in a blocking pass, but in this case, because it's literally just a physicality mechanics shot, I want to make sure that I'm blocking out each of those major steps. And so with this first sort of phase of blocking, I'm focused on trying to get the poses in there that are necessary for the story, and I think of that as my story poses, which in this case I would say I have 3 major story poses, where he's starting from, then his running, and when he hits the wall. I would say that those are the story poses, because if you just had those 3, you'd be able to, for instance, on a storyboard, you could tell the story. He's going to be starting here, he's clapping, he's going to turn, start running, and as he's running, he's going to hit this wall that he doesn't see. So I would think of those as my story poses, and then the next kind of tier down is my key poses, and for that, I think of that as the poses necessary to define the action. So he needs to be in his starting pose. I'm going to have him clapping, so I need at least 1 pose with his hands together, 1 pose with them apart. He's going to turn and start running, so that's kind of a gray area, how many keys you want there versus is this a key or is this a breakdown. That's a whole nother thing, but just so kind of establishing that action with poses, then each contact for me is a key. I also, with this run, I made sure that I had every each step of the jump, I had a pose for an up as well as each step. And then at that point, I feel like that is, if I have all of those pieces, then I have the poses I need for a blocking pass that I tend to think of as like a story pass. And I would show this to my supervisor or if I'm working directly with the director, I'd show him. And at that point, I feel like I'm communicating what I'm planning for the scene and get their feedback now so that I can start making those adjustments, making those changes without kind of creating a hiccup in the way that I tend to have a workflow. So now I have feedback and I can go straight into adding more breakdowns for a true final blocking pass and move into spline. So at the end here is my play blast in stepped mode of the shot where I'm at, and the next video that we have, I'll be doing the blocking spline pass blend, where you'll see another blocking pass that is still in stepped but has a lot more breakdowns in it, is clearly defined and ready to move into spline. Thank you again for watching the video. If you have enjoyed it, if it's been helpful, please let me know by liking, subscribing, or even just leaving a comment. I would love to get your feedback and try to add any other information that might be helpful for you guys. So thanks again, and I'll see you in the next video.